Welcome to the Manna at the Tap, a podcast of Tapestry Ministries. It is Sunday, January the 12th, 2025. The podcast is a daily Bible reading from the Revised Common Lectionary. We at the Tapestry community call this reading the manna we explore together. It is the spiritual nourishment our souls crave and the sustenance we need to nurture our spiritual growth. I'm Gloria, a fellow traveler with you on a spiritual journey, and together we can share insights and interpretations from the daily biblical lectionary reading, which will enrich our spiritual lives. Today's lectionary reading is from the Old Testament book of Isaiah, chapter 43, and the first 7 verses. This poem is part of a more extensive section of Isaiah that scholars call the second Isaiah, which encompasses chapters 40 to 55. The people of Judah had been taken from their homeland and were sent into exile by the Babylonians some 70 or so years earlier. Now, they were hearing rumors that they could return home to Jerusalem, but they were unsure what home would be like. They were considering whether to leave the stability of life in Babylon to return to the rubble of their former home or their parents' home. It was not an easy decision for the people, even though they were intensely despised and loathed by their neighbors. But the prophet Isaiah wanted to help them embrace their faith, return home, and rebuild. The lectionary reading is a poem filled with tender, encouraging, and empowering words that God spoke to a community of beleaguered people facing an uncertain future. The people, refugees, belonged to no one but God. This poem is God's word to his people while they were still in exile. And this poem, these words, were to shape their thinking and help them understand their true identity. The poem opens in verse 1 with the Lord personally speaking to the people, telling them not to be afraid. And this is what he says: I've chosen you, I've created you, I've redeemed you, I've called you by name. You are mine. The poem closes in verse 7 with the prophet reassuring words to the people. You have been created by God. You have been redeemed by God. You have been named by God, and you have been claimed by God. In the creation story of the book of Genesis, God speaks of his power. He created the heavens and the earth, and he shaped humanity from the dust of the earth. He reminded the people that he took them from servitude in Egypt to become his people. He has a claim on them, and he is committed to them. They are his people created for his purposes. The poem also confirms God's presence and protection as the people will embark on the journey back home. They will face dangers along the way, but they will not face them alone. God reminded them that when they left Egypt, the Egyptian army pursued them. The people were trapped and were frightened between what was ahead, the Red Sea, and what was behind, the Egyptian army. How could they escape? God reminded them. He parted the Red Sea and they walked over to safety on dry land, while the Egyptian army and their chariots drowned when the waters came back together. At the end of the 40-year wilderness journey, God reminded them that the Jordan was overflowing its banks and the people needed to get across to the promised homeland. It was God who divided the water into two heaps, one on either side, and the people walked through on dry land. The poem expresses God's commitment to his people through his signature statement. And his signature statement is, I will. The prophet repeated this statement, describing what I will would do for my people. The high point of the poem is also the midpoint of the reading, verse 4. Are you listening? This is what the Lord said to the people. Because you are precious in my sight and honored, I love you. Let me slowly repeat those words again. But this time, add your name to the word you. Let me illustrate what I mean. Because, Gloria, you are precious in my sight and honored, I love you, Gloria. So let's just try that together. Because, put your name, you are precious in my sight and honored, I love you. And don't forget to add your name. Today is the first Sunday after the Epiphany, and it's the Sunday that we celebrate the baptism of Jesus. That day, on the banks of the Jordan River, God the Father and Mother Spirit joined together and claimed Jesus as their beloved child. You can also claim this to be your identity. You are God's beloved child, called to witness God's grace and his mercy.